starting with my name. I hope the clicker works. So hope you're all full from your lunch, and I just want to make sure your blood flows into your brain. So my goal here is to fire up your curiosity when it comes to product growth. And more specifically, having that sort of predicting your product growth even before writing a line of code. So like the war stories, and like as Bradley mentioned, let's talk about stories. Bradley, I'm going to deliver on that. I'm going to start with my proudest failure. Look at that, I'm smiling and saying my proudest failure, because that was actually my turning point in my career. Few years ago, 5-6 years ago, I was a product manager at Xero. And this problem was given to me. Xero is in Singapore. We need to launch tax. Tax is table stakes. You got to deliver it. Like any other product manager at the time, I too rolled up my sleeves. Off I went, did my business case, did my cursory market research, did my cursory user research. Few months later, in fact, several months later, we had a solution to market. Great solution, scalable solution, awesome experience. In fact, one of our designers from that time is still in the crowd. But there was one problem. Only 2% of our customer base used the product. So there we go. So we had an awesome solution, but the solution was now looking for a market. So that, for me, and I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize for swearing, but that to me was like, fuck, what did I do wrong? I feel so relieved using that word because I didn't hear anyone else in this conference use that. But then I took that really personally. I had two choices. I could have either blamed my leaders for giving me that problem in the first place, or I could just suck it up and just turn that around like, hey, I've made something really wrong and just need to reframe that failure and just turn that around. I obviously went with choice 2. But these are the questions that kept me up in terms of how will my product grow? How will my product make money? And what is my role as a product leader? It was extremely uncomfortable. It was extremely uncomfortable to the point that I really didn't know what I was doing at some point. But what led me from there to turning that around in terms of impact, in terms of not just Xero, I even joined a company in a completely blue ocean space, decentralized identity platform, and growing a market, let alone product. Even if I say decentralized identity, you're probably looking at my face like, what the hell is she talking? But also now I'm leading teams in Timely as a senior VP of product. And in my current job, I work for a private equity firm. The company is owned by EverCommerce, as you can see my merchandise there. It is run by venture capitalists. And my day job looks like walking into Shark Tank. And if I had not gone through the journey of actually putting myself out of comfort zone, I probably wouldn't have been standing. I probably wouldn't be standing here where I am today. But that's exactly what brings me here. It's about firing up your curiosity. It's firing up or giving you tools in a way that you challenge your own ways of thinking. It's giving you tools so that you can go back to your teams and bring new ideas to the table. Now, I do understand there's a bunch of different skills here, from product owners to heads off, but that is okay, because I come from a similar background. I was a product owner, I was a product manager, I was a GM of product. I did product growth roles, and I'm currently a senior VP. So this is my story, and this is the tools that I have used. I'm going to put that in context, and I'm hoping that you can take some things from here to your day job on Monday. So where do you start? You start by defining your growth target. But the way I look at it is, before you put the puzzle together, you need to know what the picture of the puzzle is. We frantically, as product leaders, we're like, oh, let's get this thing done. Let's get this delivered. But then you try and look out for the picture of the puzzle. Now, for me, that epiphany came to me when I used this tool called 4 Fits Framework by Brian Balfour. And the 4 parts of the puzzle, and this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to step you through each part of that puzzle. When it comes to product market fit, it's actually about market, product, channel, and model fit. So I'm going to step you through each one of that, and starting with triangulating your market, customer, and competitor insights. Now, the key word here is insights. Now, when it comes to market, think about market segments. Don't outsource the job. I think today, Rich, in the morning, he said, Don't get your sales team to do the job. Do your desk research. Stop being lazy. Do your desk research. Figure out which market needs, which market segments, what is actually a gap in the market. You've got to do your desk research. In fact, even use ChatGPT for that. These days, I try and see my first draft from ChatGPT. But nonetheless, it is important you start with the market. It is also important to figure out, what are your customer jobs to be done? What are the customer needs that you're trying to solve? And is there a need even for the customer? And if you're in a blue ocean space like I was, even Google couldn't tell me that. So trust me, even Google didn't know what the hell was decentralized identity at some point. But in that case, I was looking for industry trends. If you're trying and disrupting a market with innovation, you're looking for industry trends. What are the changing habits or changing behaviors of consumers? And trying to look for something that doesn't exist through the industry lens. And finally, the competitor insights. Now, in my time, I've seen many product managers do feature comparison and say, hey, here's my competitor's features, here's our features. If we solve for all those features, we are going to win the market. That is bullshit. So unless you want to chase your tail, don't do it. I mean, the idea here is be intentional, be looking for a need in the market. If your competitor is solving this, think about how else would you solve that? How else would you influence that switching decision or switching from their product to your product? So that is the key here. And equally, the other side of it, knowing your customer journey, knowing your customer segments, I don't need to sell you on that. I'm pretty sure you know all of that. But equally, think about the buyer profile in terms of not always your customer is the same as the buyer. Now, let's take an example of education software. Kids might be using it. Kids, like I saw a few StoryPark here. Kids might be using, or parents might be using StoryPark. In this case, in education sector, another software could be using, kids might be the primary user, but who pays for it? It's not the kid, it's going to be the parents. So think about the buyer profile, the buyer hypothesis, and as much as you're optimizing for the user experience for the customer, think about how you might optimize for the commercial models to appeal to the buyer. Now, I've seen not many product managers think about buyers or buyer hypothesis. And that is the key here. Users are not always buyers. So ultimately, once you have figured out a need or a gap, you have a clear signal from the market. And once you have the signal, prepare your product response for that, not the other way around. Product is not the problem. Product is not the problem. It is a solution. So in my case of Singapore stuff, that was not a problem. That was a fucking solution. It is GST or sales tax. It is a solution. It is not a problem. So I think that's the key here, is start with the market, not with the product. Now let's come to the second part of the puzzle, which is the product. Now, I've had a lot of people spoke this morning about hypotheses and bets. I'm not going to over-index on any more on that. When you're thinking about product bets, think about product bets for the chosen segment. So remember how you started with market segment and customer segment. Don't go broad. If you go broad, you go shallow. Think about the segment, think about the need, the specific market, specific needs, and think about how or what product bets might you choose to solve that for that segment. Now, equally, you might think about services. Now, I'm currently at a company where we sell payment terminals, so hardware, along with software. So we don't think about it as, hey, the SaaS thing is going to solve the problem for someone using a Stripe terminal on their desk. Absolutely not. So when we think about product, we also think about what are service bets, like you might have a 24/7 support. You might have some SLAs. You might even outsource some of that. But the key thing is, think about it as an experience as opposed to just a product. Now, the third thing here is positioning your product in market. I'm going to give you an example, my own story here. I went to Canada. I was representing Xero at a roadshow. And like as Bradley said, probably in 2019, I too had a chip on my shoulder. I rocked up. Who knew? Everyone knows Xero here. And I thought that would be the same in Canada. I went there. This customer walked to us and said, where's the photocopier? And we're like, what? Photocopier? I was like, isn't this Xerox roadshow? I'm like, oh. And that was my, this thing is like in terms of your brand, in terms of how you position your product, that often precedes the actual product itself. Like your brand awareness, your brand recollection and brand recognition often precedes your product. Yet, us as product leaders, we write that in business case. We often write that in business case once, and we set and forget. We never go back. We never look at how often we look at those. How often do we strengthen our positioning in market when new features are launched? We rarely do that. We make that someone else's problem. So think about that again. Think about how you challenge, because that, end of the day, matters. So how are you going to reach your customers? So you got market, you got a product. Imagine I made this bottle and no one knows about this bottle. How are you going to reach your customers? So there comes the third part of the puzzle, which is the channels. Determining what channels before the product is being built is super critical. Now, quite often we finish the product, and then the product looks for market, the product looks for channels. So in my example of Singapore, we had this product, 2% of the market using it. And what I learned from that is GST was only needed for people who had 1 million revenue. So I was clearly looking at the whole market instead of a specific market. And we figured our channels to market was through accountants, in terms of really accountants working at the top end of the town, not necessarily the small business. So identifying what channels early on is really critical. So I've sort of gone through those experiences. Like in my current company, I work direct to customers. So we use paid channels, like social media paid marketing through Google Ads. At Xero, we had value-added resellers. Accountants were the primary channel. They use our product, they add more value to the product, and then they resell that to the customer, which is a small business client. When I was with MATTR, MATTR's primary channel was, it was an enterprise to so business to enterprise, business to government model. Now, if I try and mix and match that, it's not going to work. I'm definitely not going to use social media, Facebook, for an enterprise channel, because my products might be built for enterprise. So the key here is don't leave that up to the product marketer to think about it after you have built the product. The key here is while or before you even build the product, think about how are you going to reach your customers? What channels are you going to leverage? And how is that going to be distributed? So you might even have multiple channels. It doesn't have to be one channel. You can have multiple channels. So this was my journey, the before journey, in terms of, I was really outcome focused. I had all the data, and I come from an engineering background. So we had a few things around how the product, and the vision in my head in terms of product delivery. It needs to have this product utilization. Customers need to love it. So we really over-indexed on this side of product usage, CSAT, NPS. And over on the left side, we had the marketing team trying to build this top end of the funnel, getting people come through the funnel. The problem here was we were in silos. The marketing team was doing what marketing team had to do. Product was doing what product was doing. It's almost like your right hand didn't know what your left hand was doing. And getting to our goals, getting to our OKRs was like pulling your teeth out. In fact, pulling your teeth was much easier. But what changed? I think if there's any slide that I want you to remember, it's probably this slide here. What changed is seeing that as an experience all the way from attract. How do you bring people to the front door? How do you engage them? How do you become hospitable so that they're enjoying their experience? How do you make sure they're coming to you again? But more importantly, how do you know they're bringing the next customer in? So that sort of loop, to Stokes' point, it is, yes, product people, it's really hard to have a revenue impact because it's such a lag. But that loop gives you predictability. And that is the key, because you might not be able to predict the impact of revenue right away, but you might be able to predict how your product is growing or where or which segments you're going to grow. So I think that is the key here. Now, and product and go-to-market, we're not in silos. We still think about, if you're looking at each one of these activities, what is product doing? What is go-to-market doing? What is a success measure? And an example here was moments that matter, milestones. When someone is using a sandbox or when someone is using a trialist, we used to look at product utilization to see, is the trialist really engaging with our software? What milestones are they achieving? Are they using invoices? Are they using tags? And therefore, we know what sort of interest do they have in our product. And then when I was in a startup, I used to do all of those roles. So the minute I knew what the product was achieving, I could do the sales call. It's like, hey, I know you've been engaging with our product. I know these data is informing. Would you like to talk? That was a different conversation because I knew what they were doing. They knew what they needed, and it was much easier. So that concept of, in my case, we called it moments that matter, but now it's more refined. Product qualified leads, in other words, PQL, is something is as important as MQLs and SQLs. And in terms of building advocacy, it's more about your first customer comes in, they have a great experience. How do you make sure those insights, whether it's reviews, whether it's case studies, whether it is referrals, how do you actually share that? We often leave them here and then we forget about it. But when I was in a startup, we really wanted that customer loop to grow. So we had case studies, we had reviews, we had references that was floated around. Because that's how you can build advocacy. And that's how, whether it's negative or positive, it's still a feedback. And that feedback helps you build predictability. And the last thing of the slide is monetization and pricing. So there's the two aspects of this. One is channel model fit and the model market fit. Now, three questions here. How you charge your customers, how much you charge your customers, and willingness to pay. How you charge your customers. Now, most of you here might be, product owners, product managers. Your business is quite well established. You might not know, you might have a business model that exists today. If you don't know that, that's probably a good place to start is, what is your business model? How does your product make money? What is the consumption model? How does the consumer or your user consumes value out of the product? And the second thing here is, going back to my channels, one size doesn't fit all. Now let's take an example of Xero. Once again, my story here. Xero has two channels. Primary channel is accountant. Secondary channel is small business direct. If I rock up, and Xero doesn't have a freemium plan, but imagine if I rock up into a Ernst & Young, an accountant, and say, hey, I'll give you a freemium plan of Xero. Try it, and if you like it, then you can pay for it and upgrade your service. That's not going to work, is it? That's going to be like anti-brand. You're going to have brand detractors right away. But for that channel, what might work is, hey, we have a reseller program for you. If you buy 10 subscription of us, this is how less you're going to pay us. So same product monetized differently, but that's because the channels are different. So I think that's key here, because we try and over-index everything. We say, oh, we've got the pricing, or pricing is someone else's problem. But that's, to me, is a recipe for disaster. And this came really obvious when I was in a startup, when we were thinking about it, when we failed many times. It's just how you think about your channels early, how you think about monetizing the channels early. And we didn't even have a product built back then when I was at MATTR. So if you're a product owner or a product manager, imagine you add new features. You never worry about how that's going to be consumed often. If that's the case, then we can talk. But think about, is it a core offering? Is it an add-on? And it doesn't always have to be in this model. Not everything has to be an add-on. So this is just an example. And then think about value decay. What that means is, today if I give you a piece of cake, and the cake has nice icing, you pay for it. Now I put another layer of icing, another layer of icing, another layer of icing, another layer of icing. The cake becomes so inedible that even if I didn't think you would pay for it, you wouldn't even care for it. So that's how we're doing product, because we keep adding features. We keep baking in features to our existing commercial models, whether it's subscription-based or otherwise. And we actually don't preserve the future value of our product. So think about, when you're adding new features, think, how would that impact your commercial models? How else would you capitalize on that value curve? So that is really, really important if you are a product owner or if you're a product manager. Equally important is this thing here called value decay. Every 6 months, at least every year, think about, has the value of your product changed because the market has changed or the tech has changed? So Timely, for example, today they have SMS as an add-on. It was done 5 years ago. Would you actually pay for SMS as an add-on? Don't know. Because you have more newer tools, there's more things there, but yet you see that as an add-on. Probably that add-on is now a core offering. It might have changed in that quadrant, yet we never go back and look at our own commercial models and see how that has changed. The value profile of our product and packages have changed. The next part is how much you charge. Now, I've worked in small companies where I was doing the product pricing with the finance person. When Xero was scaling, I was working with the pricing committee. Product was involved with the pricing committee. And when Xero scaled really well, it was someone else's problem. But all the way through, right, if you think, you've done all the work in terms of the needs, you have understood the market, the customer, and then you have the audacity to actually pass it on to someone else to do the pricing and come back to you. That to me is just like, doesn't work. It doesn't add up in terms of you not being there to talk about the product needs, the product value, and getting someone else to come up with a modeling work done in a spreadsheet. So that, again, is an area where us as product leaders need to get really curious in terms of how are we actually pricing the product. Does the price product not just meet the needs, but the values derived from the product and the willingness to pay exist? So a good sort of tip here is, if you're a product person, try and build out that cross-functional team in terms of your sales, your RevOps, or your finance team. Depending on the context of your company and the size of your company, this might be slightly different. And I'll give you an example of how I went about it. I'll probably use this bottle as an example, not that I made this bottle. So the first thing I looked at it was, how much would it cost to build my products? So the COGS, or the cost of goods sold, is trying to figure out with my finance person, what are the different types of costs? There were product costs, there was cost to acquire a customer, there was business costs, there was another four buckets. But we really looked at what's the cost to produce this, and how long or when do we need to recover this by? Now, most of the SaaS companies, we would be a loss leader for quite some time, but at least knowing when your payback velocity in terms of how long should I keep this running so that I can recover that, or return on investment is justified. So first thing there is knowing your COGS. The second thing there is knowing how to preserve the upside and protect your downside. What that means is that as the value scales, your monetization model needs to scale with that. If you're using a Netflix subscription as an example, you might have that at a household. If more households are using, they charge you more. Why is that? Because the more value you're deriving, your price scales with that. But when I say protect your cost, that means if I'm getting this bottle through a supply chain and the supply chain is costing me $4 to produce one bottle, I need to make sure my margin is not below that. And I need to protect my costs, otherwise I'm going to be my business is going to be out. So figuring that out in terms of margin principles, figuring out what's your revenue target for each year. You might have a year-on-year growth rate, so which helps you derive what is that unit price, or what is that variable price that you can set. Now, we modeled that out initially for a retail price. So we first looked at this bottle, the cost of the bottle. If I had to cost this at a retail price, how much would this bottle cost? So it's $10. Then I went and looked at, okay, if I'm going to put this in a supermarket, if I'm going to sell, supermarket being my channel to this bottle sales, how would I price that for a supermarket? What's my wholesale price? If someone else is taking this bottle and doing some sort of arts and crafts with it, it might be a reseller, but adding more value to this. So again, for different channels, thinking about how you're going to price them differently matters. And this was just an example of me just giving you a bit of my story in terms of cost and pricing. Willingness to pay. Test it early. Again, the whole theme is before you write a line of code, test it early. I just joined a company. They're testing the price after the hardware is launched. And that was after 2 years. Okay, so let's talk about it later. But in terms of testing it early, it comes down to one of the things that we have used to do in the MATTR, where there's blue sky, nothing exists, is having pilot programs. No code, wireframes, just test it out. Does this need exist? Would customers pay for it? What else needs to happen? And even in one of the things we have done at my time at Xero was doing pricing surveys. So having to find out what is the threshold for the customer when it comes to paying for something. Is it $3, $5, $10? It might look like stupid asking the customers how much would you pay. But the whole idea of that was having the psychology of knowing the threshold of the customer through price sensitivity surveys. If you are launching new features or new add-ons, don't do the pricing or willingness to pay after you have launched it. It is painful. It is not worth it. In fact, the whole idea of doing that product was pretty waste. But think about how much early on can you do that in terms of willingness to pay. And last slide here for me is tactics. Some people call it optics. I like to call it tactics. But this one is about using human psychology, or in other words, your irrational brain when it comes to pricing. Now, quite often you would have seen this Netflix pricing where you have good, better, best version. If Netflix were just to give you one pricing, you immediately go logically, do I need it, do I not need it? It becomes really binary. But the minute you have choices, your brain, just your irrational brain takes over. It's like, do I really need good, your best, better, the value of making choices? It becomes, in this case, Netflix might be looking at targeting standard subscription. Your basic is too basic, your premium is too high. And there might be, as humans, we look for choices. We look for things that appeal to us, and we go for compromise on the second option or the standard option. Not that everyone would do that, but generally, you can use that sort of Goldilocks rule in terms of good, better, best pricing. It doesn't have to be on a subscription-based plan. I don't know if you have had Tank juice. I recently, yesterday, went and bought a Tank juice. I walked in. I thought I'll spend $7 to buy a juice. I go in. I see the small is too small for $5. I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to pay for that. Then I looked at the premium or the tall version, which is 80 cents more than the half tank. So then I went and bought the premium version because I think, you know what, I'm just going to pay 80 cents and have more juice. But all of a sudden, I spent $10, $11. I thought I'm going to have a $7 juice. But the psychology or the choices tricked me, and now I had an $11 juice. So I think that is another way of looking at pricing and how to use human psychology. The second point here is when it comes to pricing, it doesn't necessarily have to be, let's try and optimize for revenue. It's trying to incentivize for a behavior, to build out a behavior before you can build out revenue of it. Now, how many of you here use Spotify? Quite a few. How many of you have used Spotify free version? Quite a few. Now, imagine if Spotify were to give you 12 months of ad-free trial. And then after the 12 months, your trial comes to an end, and then they introduce ads. You're so used to listening to music with no ads, and now the friction is introduced. So that, again, is another way of, this is called reverse trial, where you're kind of like so used to having premium experience, and now you're being thrown into friction. You will go back to the premium version. So again, using that psychology, in this case, using that sort of habit and turn it into an addiction. Maybe don't do it with all the products. Just do it. Use your judgment. So other ones here is offering in preview mode. Sometimes you might have a feature. You're A/B testing it. You might be testing it in non-production. I was in a platform PaaS company, so we used to test new features in a non-production environment to test the value of the product, test whether the need exists before we go ahead and price for it. And that's, to wrap it up, prove fit by testing with these customer segments or customer cohorts, even before you write a line of code. The minute you write a line of code, it is expensive. Build is the most expensive part. So as much as you can do the homework upfront, the better it is. And the last thing here is be a driver, don't be a passenger when it comes to growth. I think we have all taken that luxury far too much in terms of getting someone else to do the job. But when you actually invest your time in it, time and effort in it, you will be hooked onto it. That's all I had. Thank you so much. Thank you.